The moment the champagne cork popped, I knew exactly where I stood in that family. Everyone laughed as crystal glasses clinked above the table, the sound sharp and celebratory. Meanwhile, a chipped plate slid toward me, stacked with leftovers that looked like an afterthought. Cold chicken. Half-burnt vegetables. Food scraped from a night meant for someone else. No apology. No eye contact. Just a polite smile, as if humiliation were part of the menu. This was not the first time. It was just the first time it happened so publicly. The dinner was hosted to celebrate my brother-in-law's promotion. His success was toasted like a national holiday. My sister basked in attention, wrapped in compliments and champagne bubbles. My parents beamed with pride. Every story circled back to how far they had all come together. Together never included me. I sat there quietly, fork resting on the plate, listening to jokes about struggle and sacrifice, all while they pretended I had never made any. Someone commented that leftovers suited me because I was simple and low maintenance. Laughter followed. No one noticed my hands tighten under the table. I smiled. That seemed to please them. They had always assumed I needed them, that I was surviving because of their generosity. They believed my silence was weakness, my distance a failure to keep up. What they never questioned was why I stopped defending myself years ago. As the champagne flowed, something else settled in me. Not anger. Not sadness. Clarity. This dinner was not accidental. It was deliberate. A reminder of rank. A message delivered with silverware and smug glances. And as I looked around that table, I realized they were all very comfortable humiliating someone they believed had no power. They were wrong. Because while they were busy celebrating, they had no idea what I had already built without them. They had no clue why I agreed to attend this dinner at all. And they certainly did not know that the leftovers on my plate were the last thing I would ever accept from them. By the time dessert arrived, my decision was made. I finished every bite, stood up, thanked the host, and walked out with a calm they did not understand yet. They would. I did not cry on the drive home. That surprised me more than the dinner itself. Years ago, something in me had learned how to go quiet instead of breaking. The silence that night was heavy, but it was focused. I replayed every smile, every dismissive glance, every toast that excluded me. None of it felt new. It felt confirmed. What hurt most was not the leftovers. It was the confidence with which they humiliated me. They believed there would be no consequences. That belief came from years of watching me accept less without protest. At home, I placed my purse on the table and pulled out my phone. Messages. Emails. Documents. Things I had stopped organizing because I never imagined I would need them. Proof of who paid bills when others claimed credit. Records of money I had quietly loaned and never been repaid. Screenshots of conversations where they mocked me, assuming I would never see them. I did not start collecting these things for revenge. I started because something in me knew the truth mattered, even if no one else cared yet. That night, I opened my laptop and logged into an account none of them knew existed. It held years of work. Contracts. Investment summaries. A growing balance that contradicted every story they told about me barely getting by. I remembered my father's voice from years ago, telling relatives that I was struggling and needed guidance. He liked that narrative. It made him feel important. I had let him keep it. The next morning, my sister sent a message thanking everyone for coming and posted photos from the dinner. Champagne glasses raised. Smiles wide. The table perfectly set. I was cropped out of every picture, as if I had never been there. I stared at the screen and realized something unsettling. They were not just comfortable humiliating me. They needed to. My role made their shine brighter. That was when I stopped thinking about whether I deserved better. I started thinking about timing. Over the next few days, I played my part perfectly. Polite replies. Short congratulations. No mention of the dinner. I let them relax. Let them assume I had swallowed it like always. But quietly, I began making calls. Scheduling meetings. Setting things in motion that could not be undone once started. Each step felt calm, almost clinical. I was not planning a scene. I was planning an outcome. And as the week went on, an invitation arrived in the family group chat. Another dinner. Bigger this time. A celebration involving extended relatives, business friends, and people whose opinions mattered deeply to them. I typed my response slowly. I will be there. They reacted with surprise and approval, mistaking my agreement for compliance. They had no idea this time I was not coming to eat leftovers. I was coming to change the table. The days leading up to the second dinner felt strangely light. I slept better than I had in months. Every step I took had purpose now, and that changed everything. While they finalized menus and seating charts, I finalized contingencies. I reviewed documents late into the night, checking dates, signatures, and numbers. Everything aligned too perfectly to ignore. What made it unsettling was how confident they remained. My sister called once, her tone casual, almost kind. She asked if I needed anything, suggested a dress code, reminded me who would be attending. Important people, she said. People who liked appearances. I thanked her and ended the call, knowing appearances were exactly why I had been invited. They expected me to sit quietly again, smile again, accept my place again. 2 days before the dinner, I received a message from an unfamiliar number. It was brief and cautious, asking if I still stood by something I had said years ago. I recognized the context immediately. A conversation I thought had disappeared into the past. I replied with one sentence and attached a file. The reply came within minutes. That was when I knew the night would not unfold the way they imagined. At work, I requested the evening off, citing a family obligation. My manager approved it without question, unaware of how personal the request truly was. I spent that afternoon rehearsing nothing. I did not need words prepared. Facts speak best when they arrive unannounced. The night of the dinner, I arrived early. The house was buzzing with staff, trays of food, polished glassware. My mother glanced up, surprised, then smiled in that familiar tight way. She handed me a drink without asking what I wanted. I declined politely and took a seat at the far end of the table. From there, I watched them work the room. Compliments exchanged. Laughter practiced. They introduced themselves as if success were a shared achievement, carefully curated for the audience. When the guests began to arrive, I noticed who mattered most to them. A former business partner. A distant uncle with influence. A friend who asked too many questions and remembered details others ignored. I noted where each person sat. As the first toast began, my phone vibrated softly in my pocket. A confirmation message. Everything was ready. I looked up at the table, at the champagne being poured again, at the confidence on their faces. They were relaxed, comfortable, completely unaware that their version of the evening had already slipped out of their control. And I had not said a single word yet. Dinner began exactly as planned. Plates arrived steaming and carefully arranged. This time, I was served the same as everyone else, as if the previous humiliation had been erased by good lighting and an audience. The change was intentional. They wanted witnesses to see harmony, not hierarchy. I accepted the plate without comment. Conversation flowed easily at first. Promotions, investments, vacations. Each topic chosen to reinforce the image they worked so hard to protect. My father spoke with authority, my sister laughed at the right moments, and my brother-in-law soaked in admiration like it was fuel. I listened. I always listened. Halfway through the meal, someone asked how long the family had been working together on their recent successes. My mother answered quickly, describing sacrifices and unity, emphasizing how everyone had contributed in their own way. Her eyes flicked toward me for a fraction of a second, then away. That was the opening. I did not interrupt. I waited until the questions circled back naturally, until curiosity lingered just long enough to feel unresolved. Then I spoke calmly, asking if anyone wanted to see how those contributions actually looked on paper. The table went quiet, not suddenly, but in stages. A few guests leaned back. Others leaned in. My father smiled uncertainly, assuming I was about to share a harmless anecdote. I reached into my bag and placed a slim folder on the table. No announcement. No accusation. Just presence. As pages were passed around, expressions shifted. Numbers did not lie, and these numbers told a different story than the one they had rehearsed. Payments made quietly. Debts forgiven without acknowledgement. Projects completed under my name but credited elsewhere. My sister's smile faltered first. She tried to redirect the conversation, but someone asked a follow-up question. Then another. Each answer led to another page, another detail that did not fit the polished narrative. I watched them realize, one by one, that the story they controlled no longer belonged to them. The champagne sat untouched. The air grew heavier with every second. I had not raised my voice. I had not accused anyone. I simply let the truth take up space at the table they had once used to diminish me. And this was only the beginning. The room never fully recovered after that folder opened. Conversations resumed in fragments, cautious and uneven, like everyone was afraid to touch the wrong nerve. My father cleared his throat more than once, trying to steer attention back to lighter topics, but the shift had already happened. People were no longer listening to him the same way. I could feel it. Across the table, my sister avoided my eyes. Her confidence, so polished earlier, had cracked. She leaned toward her husband, whispering urgently, but whatever reassurance she sought did not come. He was staring at the documents again, his jaw tight, his pride visibly wounded. Someone finally asked the question they had all been circling. Why had no one known about this before? My mother answered too quickly, blaming misunderstandings and poor communication. She said families make mistakes, that intentions matter more than paperwork. It sounded rehearsed, defensive, thin. I did not correct her. I did not need to. Instead, I slid one more page forward. This one detailed recent transactions, ones that directly contradicted claims they had made earlier that evening. Dates, amounts, signatures. The kind of details that end conversations rather than start arguments. A guest near the center of the table frowned and asked how long this arrangement had been going on. When the answer did not come, the silence said enough. The power at the table shifted again, heavier this time. They were no longer hosts guiding the evening. They were subjects being quietly examined. Every word they spoke now carried weight, and every hesitation drew more attention. I noticed something then that surprised me. I was not shaking. My voice, when I finally spoke again, was steady. I explained nothing beyond what the documents already showed. I did not defend myself. I simply clarified facts when asked. That restraint unsettled them more than anger ever could. Dessert arrived untouched. The celebration they had planned unraveled without a single dramatic moment, just a slow, undeniable collapse. Guests exchanged looks, some polite, some curious, some openly disappointed. As plates were cleared, I realized the evening had reached a point of no return. They could no longer pretend I was insignificant. And they were beginning to understand that what I revealed at this table was not the full extent of what I knew. Not even close. By the time coffee was served, the house felt unfamiliar to them. The laughter that once filled the space had been replaced by low murmurs and careful glances. People were no longer impressed by the decor or the menu. They were watching reactions, measuring silences, sensing that something larger was unfolding beneath the surface. That was when my phone buzzed again. I did not check it immediately. I let it rest on the table, screen lighting up just enough for my sister to notice. Her eyes followed it instinctively. Fear flickered there, quick but undeniable. She knew that look. She had seen it once before, years ago, when she assumed I would stay quiet forever. A guest asked whether everything shared so far had been resolved internally. It sounded polite, but the implication was sharp. Reputation was now at stake, and everyone at the table understood that reputations rarely survive unanswered questions. I finally picked up my phone and glanced at the message. One line. Confirmation received. Proceed when ready. I set the phone down again. My father leaned forward, trying to regain control. He spoke about family privacy, about misunderstandings being exaggerated in public settings. He suggested continuing the conversation another time, in a more appropriate space. His voice carried authority, but it lacked certainty. For the first time, people interrupted him. Someone mentioned legal implications. Another referenced prior dealings that suddenly made more sense. A third guest asked if there were additional documents that clarified ownership and responsibility. I did not answer immediately. I looked around the table, meeting each gaze calmly. They were all waiting now. Not just my family. Everyone. I explained that what had been shared tonight was only what directly affected the narrative they had chosen to present. Nothing more. Nothing less. I added that I had no intention of embarrassing anyone, but I would no longer allow false stories to define my role. The word intention landed harder than I expected. My sister stood up abruptly, claiming she needed air. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor, breaking the fragile calm. My mother followed her with her eyes, panic replacing composure. My brother-in-law stared into his glass, realizing too late that the evening had become something he could not manage. The guests sensed it too. This was no longer about leftovers or champagne. This was about what happens when the person you underestimate stops protecting your secrets. And I still had not revealed the most damaging part. The tension did not break when my sister left the room. It thickened. Every second she was gone stretched the silence tighter, like everyone knew something irreversible was about to happen. Conversations stopped entirely now. No one pretended this was still a celebration. My mother rose halfway from her chair, then sat back down, unsure which role she was supposed to play anymore. Host? Protector? Witness? None of them fit. Someone near the end of the table finally asked the question they had all been avoiding. Was there more they needed to know? I took a slow breath. Not to study myself, but to give them time to prepare. What I had next was not emotional. It was structural. It dismantled the foundation they had been standing on for years. I explained that the earlier documents were only a portion of a larger picture. That several recent decisions, investments, and public claims had been made under assumptions that were no longer accurate. I mentioned audits, reviews, processes already in motion that did not require my involvement anymore. Faces changed. My father's confidence collapsed into calculation. He was doing the math in his head, trying to identify damage control, exit strategies, names to call. My brother-in-law finally looked at me directly, searching for something he could argue with. There was nothing. My sister returned then, her composure visibly forced. She sat down without speaking, eyes darting between faces, realizing she had missed something critical. I did not look at her. A guest asked whether this information would affect upcoming announcements. The kind scheduled for next week. The kind that assumed everything was stable. I answered honestly. Yes. That single word landed heavier than any accusation could have. It meant consequences were no longer theoretical. It meant timelines were already shifting. I watched the realization spread. Not just that they had underestimated me, but that they had built too much on that assumption. Their success stories. Their authority. Their comfort. The evening was beyond saving now. As people began gathering their things, offering polite excuses, I remained seated. Calm. Present. Untouchable. They were the ones scrambling. My mother finally spoke my name, her voice unfamiliar, almost fragile. She asked if we could talk privately. I stood up then, slowly, deliberately. There was one final truth they had not heard yet. And it was the one they feared most. I agreed to speak privately, but not where they expected. I asked everyone to stay. The truth had lived in silence long enough. It did not need another closed door. My mother froze. My father looked around, realizing too late that there was no authority left to lean on. The guests paused, unsure whether to leave or witness the end of something they now understood had been rotting for years. I spoke calmly. I explained that everything they built their image on rested on my silence. That the support they denied me, the credit they erased, the role they reduced me to had allowed them to look stronger, smarter, more united than they truly were. I said I was done carrying that weight. Then I shared the final piece. The investments they celebrated were no longer theirs to control. The accounts they assumed were secure had already shifted. The partnerships they depended on had clauses they never bothered to read because they trusted the wrong narrative. Mine. This was not revenge fueled by anger. It was correction. My father tried to speak, but nothing came out. My sister stared at the table, her face drained of color. My brother-in-law finally understood that his rise had been balanced on a lie he never questioned. No one argued. There was nothing to argue with. I thanked the guests for their time and told them the evening was over. not as a suggestion, as a statement. One by one, they left quietly, carrying with them a story far more memorable than the celebration they had been invited to. When the door closed behind the last guest, the house felt empty in a way it never had before. I picked up my bag and walked toward the exit. My mother whispered my name again, softer this time, but I did not turn around. There was nothing left to explain. At the dinner where I had once been served leftovers, I finally took my place by removing myself entirely. And that changed everything. If you like this story, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. See you in the next one.